Alright, boys and girls, we're going to talk about understanding percents. And the first thing, or what I want you to know by the time we get finished with this video, is how you can write a ratio as a percent. So keep in mind that's the focus of the video. That's what I want you to learn. Alright, so the first thing we need to talk about is what exactly is a percent? Well, a percent is of 100, or per 100 is what we're saying when we say the word percent. And just to show you an example of that, I have this little diagram drawn up here that's saying 1% of something. Here we're talking about means 1 per 100. Okay, so 1%, this 1% drawn right here, this little green square, out of all these 100 squares here that I have, 1% is just one of those things colored in. Okay, so just that little shaded green square is what I'm talking about when I say 1% of something. Alright, so if I'm talking about 100%, hopefully you all realize that means all of it, or everything. Okay, so in this particular example, I have 100% means all, or the whole thing. Alright, so my example is I have this 10 by 10 grid that has 100 squares in it, and if I'm talking about 100%, then I have the entire grid shaded in. Okay, an example of that is 100% of 80 is 100 per, we got the fraction bar there, meaning per 100. So 100 per 100 times 80. Okay, and if you multiply this out, you get 80. So that just lets you know that 100% of 80 is, in fact, 80. Okay, let's look at another example. Here I have 50%. Alright, and 50% means half. So same example, I got a 10 by 10 grid. I got 50 squares shaded in, that's half of them. And I'm still going with the 80. 50% of 80 means I have 50 per 100. I multiply that times 80, and I get 40. Okay, so half of 80, or 50% of 80, is 40. So if you count all these squares up, there's 10, 20, 30, 10, 20, 30, 40. 50%, okay, means I have half of the whole thing. And half of 80 is, in fact, 40. Let's look at another one real quick. So this one's a little bit smaller. You know, the 50, the 100, that's kind of obvious. It's easy to do. But if we're talking about 5%, then we're talking about 5 of the 100. Okay, so that's a little trickier to figure out. 5% of 80 is 5 per 100 times 80. Okay, and if you multiply this out, you wind up getting 4. Okay, so 5% of 80 is 4. And I'm going to show you how to do that here in a minute, so don't think I'm not showing you what to do. Alright, so I tell you what, let's back up. Let's back up here. Let me just show you how this is done. Hopefully I have enough room. Let me scoot this up a little bit and show you exactly how we multiply this out so you see it. Okay, so I have 5% of 80 is basically 5 out of 100, and you multiply that times 80. Okay, so when we think about this, we should be thinking that this is a fraction. So I want to treat it like a fraction because I'm multiplying two fractions together. Okay, I multiply my top times the top, bottom times the bottom. 5 times 80 is 400. 100 times 1 is 100. If I simplify, if I go ahead and simplify, and the easiest way to simplify this is just to knock off these zeros, and what I wind up with is 4 over 1. The equivalent number to 4 over 1, or what 4 over 1 simplifies to, is 4. Okay, and that's how I get my answer. I just want to make sure you guys understand that because we're going to do an example, or I want you to do an example. So here's your turn. This is where you show me that you understand what we're talking about. Okay, so here is a grid, and it says what percent of the box, of the above box, is green. Is it A, 24%? Is it B, 26%? Is it C, 74%? Or is it D, 76%? Okay, so I want you to pause the video. I want you to figure it out, and then start the video back, have this answered when you come to class, and we can talk about it. Okay? I will ask you for that when we first get into class, probably right after we do the warm-up. Now, we're going to talk about this in the form of a word problem. Okay, so we can figure this out. So here I have a TV originally cost $400. If the price of the TV increases by 15%, what is the new price? Okay, so this shouldn't be too hard to figure out. Alright, all we're going to do is we're going to do exactly what we were just talking about. And I want to say 15%, alright, of 400, we're talking about the dollars here, is going to be what? Okay, so how we figure this out is we say 15 per 100 times 400. Okay, and as I mentioned before, I want to treat this like a fraction, so I want to go ahead and turn it into a fraction over 1. Alright, that way I can keep track of what I'm multiplying. So I want to multiply my top times the top, bottom times the bottom. Alright, and what I wind up with is 15 times 4. 15 times 400 is going to give me 6,000. So I have 6,000 over 100 times 1, which is 100. Okay, and to simplify that, all I'm going to do is cancel out the zeros here, cancel out the zeros here, and what I'm left with is 60. Okay, so 15% of 400 is 60, but that's not what the question's asking. The question is asking what is, let me see, where's my highlighter here? There we go, highlighter. The question is asking what is the new price? So what I have to do is take this $60 here and add it back to the 400, and that's an easy add. So hopefully 60 plus 400 equals $460. Okay, so that is the new price of the television. So going back to the original essential question, I asked you guys, or I wanted you to make sure that you understood how to write a percent or a ratio as a percent or a percent as a ratio. Let me just go back to it real quick and go back to the first question. How can you write a ratio as a percent? Okay, so let me get to page 6. So what I did, in this case, I actually wrote a percent as a ratio. So I took the 15% and I wrote 15 per 100, or 15 out of 100, and that's basically a ratio. Okay, and then I took that ratio and I multiplied it times the 400, the dollars in this case for the TV. Of, you need to remember, of always means to multiply, so that directly translates into multiplication. So 15% of 400, I use that percent as a ratio. I say 15 per 100 times 400. Alright, I want to multiply my fraction basically times another fraction. I don't want to necessarily do it as a whole number. I want to make sure that I rewrite it as a fraction so I keep track of what I'm multiplying. I'm multiplying the numerator times the numerator and the denominator times the denominator. Alright, so that is answering our essential question.